Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media conference. I have with me here today the Honorable Attorney General and Minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General, and I'll start with the Attorney General.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to Trinidad and Tobago. Just two quick but very important announcements which really affect our criminal justice system and the capacity with which we manage caseloads, etc. Cabinet is pleased to announce that we gave the green light for the proclamation of the Plea Discussion and Plea Agreement Act. That's the Criminal Procedure Plea Discussion and Plea Agreement Act. We are proposing that this becomes law by way of Her Excellency proclaiming the act with effect from January 2nd, 2019. This is a very important piece of law which allows us, now that the stakeholders have confirmed their readiness for it, to enter into charges being considered before the court in a very defined process so that we can actually have the use of the systems of justice going into different parts, including, number one, people who wish to plead guilty and have plea arrangements put into effect. Number two, obviously, that shortens the list of people that go before the courts. Number three, it allows for a better operation of what we call maximum sentence indication procedures, where people can understand exactly what their charges are going to be in certain circumstances before they enter into plea arrangements. This works in tandem with what you see happening in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service right now. You ought to note that there have been significant arrests made, in particular in relation to arms and ammunition, drugs, and very importantly, in relation to corruption matters. This allows these procedures to go into effect and for people to really consider the weight of the law that is immediate on them and what they're going to do about it. So this is a very important piece of law. The second law that we have as a cabinet determined should be proclaimed is another equally important piece of law. It's the proclamation of the Miscellaneous Provisions Supreme Court of Judicature and Children Act 2018. We have looked at December 31st as the date for the vast majority of provisions and February 1st for two particular provisions, and I'll explain that. This Miscellaneous Provisions Act is the act by which we have increased the capacity of the judiciary by 77% as one of the things that we're looking at. This also allows for the appointment of judges to come from the Commonwealth and not just the Bar of England and the Bar of Trinidad and Tobago. This fits in with the government already having proclaimed, as of December 1st, already in effect, the Criminal Division and Traffic Division Courts. It's in that piece of law that the Chief Justice has the opportunity to create specialist courts in Section 24. So with the opportunity for specialist courts now standing as the law to treat with matters, for instance, that people have been asking about, sexual offenses, rape, domestic violence, or corruption, you now have the capacity in the criminal division to proclaim specialist courts. And now we're allowing for the JLSE to secure a number of things, including the availability of specialist judges for these arenas. The other parts of the miscellaneous provisions relate squarely to the children's package. This is part of the broadening of the government's work, which has involved the Family and Children Division, the specialist courts for children to treat with crimes exclusively for them, peer resolution, juvenile management, now called child rehabilitation management. So this is a significant amount of work. But inside of that envelope, very much to be appreciated is the fact that as corruption, proceeds of crime, money laundering, as those things become equally aggressive, such as kidnapping, such as murder, such as other offenses, sexual offenses, you now have the courts having capacity to treat with things and systems in place to manage them in the tightest way possible. So just wanted to share those two positions with you in terms of Cabinet's approval today for proclamation. They go alongside with other laws that we've already proclaimed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney General. I'll now invite questions.
Date is the proclamation to be second, you told us January the 2nd for the first one, the discussion, the proclamation of the miscellaneous provisions is when?
The proclamation for the miscellaneous provisions, perhaps you missed it, we are going for December 31st. The only thing that we've put out to February 1st in there is the positions of the clerk of the magistracy. You know right now that the magistrates court run with a chief magistrate, and the administrative side is done by a clerk of the peace. Clerk of the peace is not legally trained. The clerk of the peace gives legal advice. Clerk of the peace, for instance, in domestic violence, gives certain advice which has come in for criticism as to what women ought to do or not to do. And what we have done is to place the position of the management of the administrative side and the clerking of the peace side, if I can use that expression, into the hands of a qualified legal practitioner who will be a senior magistracy registrar. Just like you have a registrar in the High Court, you'll have a registrar in the Magistrates Court. And you must remember, the magistracy deals with approximately 140,000 cases per year. So the Magistrates Court has the lion's share of case management. In getting people to have justice delivered faster, it was important for us to put the reformation into the Magistrates Court, division out the courts, put in administrative structures, create more judicial capacity, create rules of court as you have criminal proceedings rules, take out the traffic offenses, etc. So this results in matters moving faster so that you could actually live up to the expression that people want to know is capable of: if you do the crime, you should do the time.
Of most of it on December 31st, and the actual establishment of the courts, you know, a time frame when people can expect that they'll be up and running.
Well, the proclamation is for an immediate effect. You see, these laws are to reform structures that already exist. So we're not going out, apart from judges, we're not going out to hire people to do things. It's to put in the administrative structures to better organize what we have. It's sorting, arranging. I'll give you an example. In using the maximum sentence indicators, something which has not been done, over the long vacation of the court, we were able to process out 150 people in the prisons. With a further 150, up to 300 prisoners were able to access what their sentences look like, because prisoners were met with the position: I'm incarcerated for 7 years awaiting a trial, and if I were to plead guilty now, my maximum sentence is probably 10 years, but the waiting time for the matter may be another 6 years. So there is an option now, subject to their legal advice, for them to consider how they are going to be treated in the system. And that's just one example of better operationalizing something which you have.
Take my traffic ticket on January 1st and access a specialist traffic court?
The specialist courts under the criminal division side, which went into effect, those aspects for the traffic courts are going to come in when we proclaim the violation side. So the motor vehicle and road traffic side, to create violations as opposed to offenses, will result in roughly 140, I'd say maybe 102,000 cases per year going into violations. Those violations come to you in email. The system for that, it will be, as we estimate, up and running in or around February of next year. So in or around February of next year, you're going to pull out 100 and something thousand cases from 140,000 cases, therefore leaving magistrates to do magistrates' work. If you want to come to court on your violation, you have to tell the court, I want to come to court. And then you go through a certain process there. So this is going, in the course of 2019, there's going to be a radical shift, particularly because, as you know, we have also passed the electronic transactions for court payment. It's called the court pay bill, where you will be allowed to do all of this online. That is going to be an online service, cash payments done online, also in the Registrar General, Intellectual Property Office, and Motor Vehicle and Licensing arena, as we get electronic payments to be the feature, where we go effectively cashless.
In general, July 66 News, I'm just wondering, another thing you may have alluded to just now in terms of judges from outside of Trinidad and Tobago, in Commonwealth, if I'm not mistaken, how soon do you envision the vacancies on the bench being filled by such judges?
That would be a matter for the JLSC in their operation. We have no role or function in that.
And A matter that may or may not fall under the purview of the government. I know the Prime Minister have commented yesterday concerning the Law Association's vote concerning the issue of the Chief Justice. He hasn't received a report as yet. Could you give us a sense of, once he does receive that report, what would then be the next step?
I'll leave that to Minister Hinds, but that's a matter entirely for the Prime Minister. Minister Hinds will address that.
Thank you very much. It is anticipated that once the Prime Minister is in receipt of the necessary information, it is for his contemplation and his decision as to what would be done. As he has said, and I can only repeat, consonant with the Constitution, of course, it is entirely a matter for the Prime Minister. When the matter is before him, he will exercise his mind and in those deliberations. For the time being, we wait.
In such an instance,
confirm that you all have received the LATT report?
The Office of the Prime Minister, which has to receive it, at this stage, we've just come out of Cabinet and have no such confirmation. As soon as the Office of the Prime Minister receives it, we will let you all know.
is this a situation if the Prime Minister is, if in any deliberation he may, would that include seeking legal advice, or is this something that he could determine of his own accord?
Well, as you would imagine, this is a matter of constitutional purport, and no Prime Minister, especially including the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I might add, given his very sober and sensible and deliberate approach to the job of being Prime Minister, he would act without advice. So if he considers that advice is necessary, he will surely assume that advice and exercise and deliberate on the matter as the Constitution dictates.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're not speculating. It's a matter solely for the Prime Minister, and he will address those facts. So we're not going to enter into any speculation. When the Prime Minister is in a position to speak to that, he will speak to that.
Looking at what the Guardian reported today, excerpts from the LATT report that keep bringing up this issue of communication between the CJ and the Prime Minister on
As the Attorney General has just said, no, because as the Attorney General has just said, at this stage, there's nothing before the Prime Minister. We saw what the report said. At this stage, there is nothing for the Prime Minister to consider. He will take legal advice at that stage. We have seen what the Guardian report is suggesting about recusal, etc. None of that arises at this stage, because certainly from the Prime Minister's perspective, he has received nothing as yet, and he will seek the appropriate legal advice at that stage. That is a newspaper report that is opinionated, and we want to leave it right there at this stage, please.
To backtrack to the correspondence that the Law Association said they sent to both him and you, requesting some kind of response to those allegations as the team was building their report.
Let me make it abundantly clear, if it's not clear. At this stage, it is not appropriate for any comments to be made. When the correspondence from the Law Association comes, maybe you have seen the reports, maybe you've seen it, and maybe correct, and that's all part of a process. In this, it is very important that a process is followed. So let us wait and see what comes before the Prime Minister. At that stage, he will take the appropriate legal advice, and as this administration is known for, we will speak when we need to speak on certain items.
May I just remind you that the Constitution is what has to guide this process. Secondly, if there's a process, one, if you use an example, you don't ever go and discuss a matter with a judge in a press conference. A judge has a process to go through. So let's respect the process. The Prime Minister is the only person mentioned in Section 137. The Prime Minister will speak to that issue. That's why I have not spoken other than just to guide you along the process. It's exactly akin to sitting down in front of a judge on a casual occasion and asking him for his views on something which is reported in a paper where he has a process to go through. It would be infradig and improper to engage in that exercise, and it would make a mockery of our Constitution. So let's respectfully leave those matters to the Honourable Prime Minister to speak to solely.
Outside of the process, I'm just wondering, given the report of the vote of the Law Association, does the government have any concern about issues of confidence in the administration of justice. If you have the body representing lawyers.
You know that is the test under Section 137. All right, so as the Attorney General has said, as I have said, let us just park this. Let us not speculate. Let us not allow ourselves to rush ahead. Let's leave it right where it is. When the Prime Minister receives the correspondence and whatever else the Law Association wants to send to him at that stage, then it will be dealt with. So
Look at this objectively and fairly and trigger 137 under the constitutional premise.
The same thing that we just answered, we're not okay, but I've made it very, very clear that at this stage, we are not entertaining any further questions with respect to this because it enters into the realm of speculation, but more so what the Attorney General has alluded to. It is a very careful process under the Constitution, and we're not going to be dragged down any road apart from that straight and narrow path of what needs to be done pursuant to the Constitution. Are there any other questions on any other topics? We'll entertain it at this stage.
You all have you given yourself a time frame at all?
But you can't kick into gear anything until you've received it, and we're not going to speculate. If it's one piece of paper that arrives, then that might take a little less time than a pile of files, etc. So let's not speculate. Let's just wait for it to happen. I assume it is going to happen, and at that stage, it will be dealt with. Are there any other questions on any other matters not related to this?
Discussion about, I think it was the Ministry of Planning, trying to correct the figure, saying it's about 41% of the nation's population earning under $6,000 a month. That has raised questions about maybe the feasibility or the necessity to look at the minimum wage. Because we're in a climate where so many people are essentially under wage freezes because the cost of living is going up, is that something that the government would look at as an alleviating factor for this group of people that's struggling?
There are a number of things that the government will look at. That information, I saw it in the newspapers today, and it was in direct response to a contribution of Dr. Gopi Singh, Rambachan, sorry, and at that stage what you've raised has not arisen.
But just to add to that, just to remind you, the government has immediately addressed that already, because what we did is to remove the taxation of people who were previously caught there. So if you recall, we said that all people that earn under $6,000 per month are now tax-free. So we've already taken a step in our budgetary cycles to address that in part, and the rest of it will obviously be a conversation which happens as the economy and the stimulation aspects begin to move ahead. But that's a very phased approach, and that would be something that the Minister of Finance would be the best person to speak to.
Julian News from Newsday. And as we're on the topic of the CSO, we know there's been issues with the CSO in the past. Is the CSO back up to optimal capacity and providing the government with?
CSO has continued to function. Part of the difficulty was accommodation, etc. But I believe right now, before the Parliament and up for debate, is a new statistical office, and that's the move that we're moving towards. And actually, as a cabinet, we were recently updated on how that has been progressing, and the Minister of Planning is pushing it very swiftly along to make sure that this new body is built out in the shortest possible.
And the quick add-in is that the CSO only ever shut down under the UNC, and when they had shut down, they were using the Ministry of Finance to do these statistics. As you know, when we came in, we ensured that the CSO was bettered. It is in operation, and the Minister of Planning is pushing the National Statistics Bill, which is currently on deck right now, and which will advance this process.
When is that bill set to come to Parliament?
It's in the Parliament already.
The Organization of American States has expressed with the greatest concern the arrival of nuclear-capable Russian aircraft in Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago, if I'm not mistaken, is a member of the OAS. Does that then mean that the government is in support of that OAS position?
First of all, I can actually say here, I was in Washington and meeting with the U.S. State Department earlier this week on Tuesday when that piece of news took place. That has nothing to do with Trinidad and Tobago. That's something that is taking place in Venezuela. And as I also saw stated, and quite accurately, there are a number of these types of operations taking place all over the world. Trinidad and Tobago certainly is not going to be drawn in that. I have not seen if, in fact, OAS have put out something. They were one of the parties that I had discussions with on Tuesday, and that did not come up for discussion. So if that has come up, then it will go through the normal process that we go through with OAS, and the government's position will then be articulated. But right now, we're not going to speculate on it because we haven't seen it.
I ask, of course, because we have the issue of our close relationship with both the United States and Venezuela. Correct. The recent gas deal signed in Caracas between the Prime Minister and Venezuela's president. So, of course, one wonders, this kind of military presence from Russia, would that not cause concern to the government?
So which government? No. No.
Minister, level at this point of the 500 murders for the year. Firstly, there's been a call from the opposition for you to take responsibility for that.
How do I respond? What?
Responsibility for it by resigning.
So, as I've said throughout, since assuming the position of Minister of National Security, every single crime committed in Trinidad and Tobago is of concern to me. I have seen the opposition. I've seen a report in one newspaper by the leader of the opposition calling for my resignation. At this stage, I don't think there's anything for me to resign with respect to. I've also seen a very transparent attempt by the opposition, which they've been trying to do from day one, since there was the appointment of a new commissioner of police under my watch, to try and put some sort of wedge and say that the commissioner of police is too far in front there and the government is hiding behind. Any right-thinking and civic-minded citizen can see that that is a ruse by the opposition, and they're trying to just create a false narrative. At the end of the day, the Commissioner of Police and the men and women in Trinidad and Tobago Police Service are the ones constitutionally who have the powers of arrest, who can do the policing work. I can't. I can't go and arrest anyone. I can tell you that every single week I have been having meetings with not only the Commissioner of Police and his certain heads of divisions, but also the other palms of law enforcement or intelligence agencies, etc. And there is a lot that is happening that you all are seeing some of the results and effects for. And that is being driven by the Ministry of National Security, working along with these bodies and everybody understanding their roles. That I can't say, go and arrest this person, go and do this, etc. But what I can say is, listen, there's this type of technology out there. It would be better if we all are all sharing intelligence. It's better if we have intelligence-driven operations. Make sure that people are getting the information they need. Commissioner of Police, what additional resources do you need? Prison Service, what additional resources do you need? Defense Force, what are we doing to strengthen our borders, etc. I am ignoring the leader of the opposition and her members in these calls. At the end of the day, I am doing my job, doing it to the best of my ability, and there are results that are being shown at this time. And also, I'll use this opportunity to say, as a Minister of National Security, I took a decision from the 6th of August that I am not going to be a Minister of National Security out there rah-rahing and talking about what we're doing, etc. Matters of national security, when the public need to know, I will inform them, etc. But certainly I am going to let the experts do their job, and I'm going to be supporting them from behind, as you've seen when there have been murders of prison officers with the recent flooding, etc. There are times for Minister of National Security to speak, and I will speak on those occasions.
In addition, if I might add, the government, recognizing the importance of the police organization, quite apart from the operational elements that Minister Young just spoke about, we saw some of the institutional weaknesses of the police organization, and the results is that it was not serving Trinidad and Tobago as best as it could, given current circumstances. We instituted a manpower audit led by Professor Deo Saran at the urging of the Prime Minister, and that committee reported looking at the organization and making some strong recommendations. We immediately brought that to the Parliament, recognizing it is a national issue rather than a Minister Young issue or government issue. The Parliament agreed. It was sent to the Joint Select Committee on National Security, which I chair. We went through that, and we, the Joint Select Committee, issued a very, very important report back to the Parliament, which the Parliament is churning over now. We started a debate, a parliamentary debate, on this important organization or institution that is the police service, all with a view of making it better and stronger to be able to do the operational things and to cope with the demands that it is faced with in today's world. The government is keeping an eye on that, and the government, through Minister Young, is determined to implement the elements of the report that can be implemented, legislative, administrative, resource, and otherwise, in order to ensure that we have a police service which could treat with the demands of the very challenging circumstances that subsist today in Trinidad and Tobago.
And to add to what Minister Hinds has said, you all would recall, I find it quite ironic that we have the leader of the opposition jumping up now and saying what a great job the commissioner is doing and what a great person he is, which is something that we as a government had a foresight to see in advance. The opposition did not participate in the appointing of Mr. Gary Griffith as the Commissioner of Police, and they should be reminded of that. The leader of the opposition was not even present in Parliament. She would not even lift the whip. She did not allow members, and we know, because we were told by members of the opposition, that certain members of the opposition actually wanted to support him, and the instructions coming from above in the opposition was that they were not to support. All right? Then, in addition to what Minister Hinds has said, in that very important debate, we also had the opposition saying that it was a waste of time debating it. But the most important piece of information, I think, that came out from that is the commissioner has gone through all of the recommendations. The commissioner and his men and women in the executive, in the Professor Diosaran report, and they have actually come up with implementation plans and tick boxes to implement everything there. The government will do its part, but the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, under the leadership of the Commissioner of Police, is already implementing the recommendations.
I'm sorry to stretch this, and I'm going to be very brief. Mrs. Prasad Bisesa is panicking because she's seeing the puzzle slowly come together. I just told you about the laws that we are proclaiming. I told you about the speed up inside of the courts, the maximum sentence approach, the plea bargaining approach. If you start to put the pieces together, the UNC under Mrs. Prasad Bisesa have said no to white-collar crime prosecution, no to Trinidad and Tobago police getting income tax information to follow the money, no to Commissioner Gary Griffith, no to the Anti-Gang Act being amended to include white-collar crime, no to every single piece of progress that we have. They said no to the criminal division. They said no to judge only. They said no to plea bargaining until they changed their minds later. So what you are seeing right now is Mrs. Prasad Bisesa recognizing a competent Minister of National Security working in conjunction with a competent Commissioner of Police, following the good work that Minister Dillon did, seeing the Attorney General's portfolio begin to bring life. You are seeing her panic. And this is about her trying to influence people by old talk. And that's the end of it.
Into the PNM's administration, the party having run on a campaign about crime and the economy ostensibly, how is this, reaching this milestone, not to be seen as anything but an indictment on the ability of the government to deliver on promises it's made 3 years?
First of all, if you go and look at it, there has been, especially within the last few months, a lot more detection. So when you're seeing crimes being committed, use the kidnappings as an example, almost immediately, the persons, unfortunately, knock on wood, have been rescued. Persons are being prosecuted for it, and this is not only limited to the kidnappings. You've been seeing a number of serious busts taking place. Again, those are all intelligence-driven. You saw the first, and ironically, the media did not focus on it at all, but you saw the first arrest and charges under the anti-gang legislation take place. So there has been a ramp-up. And as a government, we stand there committed. Also, a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, the borders, we were having a lot of infiltration of our borders, of illegal immigrants coming in. Immediately, the government assisted with the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard as well as other law enforcement agencies stemming these things. So we are utilizing the very limited resources and providing a number of supporting initiatives behind the persons who are charged with the responsibility of doing it. And I think those are the people that you all need to speak to. So, I mean, seeing the Commissioner of Police take this leading role in communicating with the national community is a breath of fresh air. But at no point in time has this administration abdicated its duties in the national security arena, and we will continue to work as hard as we can. Obviously, it's very upsetting for the number of murders, which is one of the statistical measurement lines that the public uses, cross 500. Seeing one murder a day is too much as far as I'm concerned. But I can tell you, because being there in the engine room and the boiler room, working along with those who are charged with the responsibility, I can tell you there's a new energy, there is just a whole new vibrancy, and persons are working together, including the Ministry of National Security, to fight this element and scourge of crime.
Fane, you asked a question. 3 years later, rating effectively on 2 issues, economy and crime. On economy, the Minister of Finance and Minister Young, because he's too polite to say it, they have done significant work with the Ministry of Energy in recovering our position for our main basket item. Companies are no longer leaving Trinidad and Tobago because of our gas shortage. They are no longer packing up and mothballing. Secondly, the money take for the people of Trinidad and Tobago is the subject of significant announcement, which will come to a particular point very shortly. Suffice it to say, we believe that the economy is headed in the right direction, and certainly we've made great steps on it, and we will demonstrate that conclusively. On the crime issue, Dr. Rowley today said something which echoed in my mind. The first 3 years that we spent in office was rectifying a lot of insanity in this country, putting in measures to control institutions, making sure that we were not guilty of no value for money and waste and corruption and mismanagement. Under this position, we have managed to do very significant appointments, very significant improvements. The people of this country are hungry for results. And when you're talking to a starving man to tell him that you have finally bought an oven and you just bought the chicken and you're about to put it to roast so you could feed him, it doesn't help his hunger. But that's effectively what we have done. The meal will have to be served. The population will judge us on the back of results, and therefore I endorse Minister Young's approach, in particular to national security, because he is the catalyst to make sure people do their jobs. This country is breathing a breath of fresh air and relief by one simple appointment in one area that we've done, which is the Commissioner of Police. So the proof is in the eating of the pudding, and we will get there and we will be measured and judged on it at the next poll.
Mr. Hinds, in your capacity as chairman of the Joint Select Committee on National Security, the State Constable Association, Airport Branch, has written to you on 2 occasions, once in September 2017 and March 2018. They would like to come before the Joint Select Committee on National Security to discuss issues arising out of security at the airport. In the light of a number of recent incidents at the airport, are you prepared to consider having them appear before the committee?
Of course, the mandate of that committee is to look at the policy as it relates to national security and any implications for the practice of national security. We have interfaced with that association, I think, in the past. We have an agenda, of course, and we have a flexible agenda where we will deal with matters as they arise. My committee actually went to the airport and the seaports. We visited and we had a look at them, we interfaced with them, the airport security on that occasion, and we got a good sense from them what some of those issues are. But to answer your question more specifically, yes, we are always willing to entertain them. Of course, as I say, we have an agenda, so once a letter comes before me and my colleagues in the committee consider it, we're quite happy to have them. But we have a general sense of what the issues are in that corner, and we have conveyed a lot of that to the Minister of National Security, who is treating with that matter along with other agencies as they see fit. Just to come back to Fane very briefly, we promised a number of things in the campaign, but we would not have been foolish enough mindless enough to promise that there would be no murder or murders. No government welcomes that. That is the reality. You will recall back in 2010, I think it was, the last administration was faced with about 6 or 7 murders in Arima in one weekend, and they ran crazily into a state of emergency that lasted about 3 months. That was their reaction to it. We did not promise there would be no murder. We regret that there are murders. We promised efforts to improve our border security, and the minister has been very, very profuse and effusive in demonstrating the actions he has taken, including getting vessels repaired, purchasing or obtaining other vessels, and other things in terms of our border security. We promised that we will treat with the institution of the police service, which we are now doing, as I explained a moment ago. We promised that we will speed up the court system, which the Attorney General was very detailed on a moment ago. Those are the things we've promised. And we are executing our promises to the letter. We promised we would lead from the front in terms of behaviors in relation to crime, whether white-collar crime or otherwise. And after the 3 years of which you spoke, and the recovery and rehabilitation of the economy as we are doing, you don't have the trouble of hearing at the ministerial level every Monday morning, we encouraging crime by participating in white-collar crime. So we are doing what we promised, every bit of it, in answer to your question.
In fact, I don't think anybody promises no murders, but certainly there's an implicit promise when you're coming to an electorate that you'll reduce the rate. And this year, year 3, the rate has gone up compared to the last 2 years.
We do that by making, we promised as well that we would appoint a police commissioner, and we did that. Most of all, we promised to provide the resources as this country could afford it to all of the agencies in national security. We've been doing that, and, well, the minister has indicated. So we're keeping our promises.
Bugbear for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the number of people being killed, that has not improved this year?
Well, there are a lot of influences in and behind that, matters that we can discuss on an ongoing basis. But as a government, we are carrying out our promises to make the police institution better and the other things I've just discussed. And that will continue. It cannot. I anticipate it will get better as we tighten the criminal justice system, as people get their day or days in court more swiftly, as there are more judges to deal with the matter, as we improve the rehabilitation process in the nation's prison, as we continue to support the education program so that less and less of our younger citizens will be disposed to crime and criminality, as we continue to maintain our social program. All of those things are our attempts to deal with it as a government. And if we are failing in that regard, point it out. But we are carrying out our responsibility, and we are confident that in so doing, it will serve us better.
Members of the media, I'd like to thank you all very much for your participation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.